Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we'll be in Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 14 through chapter 7, verse 16. From the day that I, Nehemiah, was appointed governor in the land of Judah, that is, from the 20th year until the 32nd year of King Artaxerxes, 12 years in all, neither I nor my relatives ate the food allotted to the governor, but the former governors who preceded me had burdened the people and had taken food and wine from them, in addition to 40 shekels of silver. Their associates were also domineering over the people, but I did not behave in this way, due to my fear of God. I gave myself to the work on this wall, without even purchasing a field. All my associates were gathered there for the work. There were 150 Jews and officials who dined with me routinely, in addition to those who came to us from the nations all around us. Every day, 1 ox, 6 select sheep, and some birds were prepared for me, and every 10 days all kinds of wine in abundance. Despite all this, I did not require the food allotted to the governor, for the work was demanding on this people. Please remember me for good, O my God, for all that I have done for this people. When Sanballat, Tobiah, Gershom the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and no breach remained in it, even though up to that time I had not positioned doors in the gates, Sanballat and Gershom sent word to me, saying, "Come on, let's set up a time to meet together at Kepharim, in the plain of Ono." Now they intended to do me harm, so I sent messengers to them, saying, "I am engaged in an important work, and I am unable to come down. Why should the work come to a halt when I leave it to come down to you?" They contacted me 4 times in this way, and I responded the same way each time. The 5th time that Sanballat sent his assistant to me in this way, he had an open letter in his hand. Written in it were the following words: "Among the nations it is rumored, and Gershom has substantiated this, that you and the Jews have intentions of revolting, and for this reason you are building the wall. Furthermore, according to these rumors, you are going to become their king. You have also established prophets to announce in Jerusalem on your behalf, 'We have a king in Judah.' Now the king is going to hear about these rumors, so come on, let's talk about this." I sent word back to him, "We are not engaged in these activities you are describing. All of this is a figment of your imagination." All of them were wanting to scare us, supposing their hands will grow slack from the work, and it won't get done. So now strengthen my hands. Then I went to the house of Shemaiah, son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel. He was confined to his home. He said, "Let's set up a time to meet in the house of God within the temple. Let's close the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. It will surely be at night that they will come to kill you." But I replied, "Should a man like me run away? Would someone like me flee to the temple in order to save his life? I will not go." I recognized the fact that God had not sent him, for he had spoken the prophecy against me as a hired agent of Tobiah and Sanballat. He had been hired to scare me so that I would do this and thereby sin. They would thus bring reproach on me, and I would be discredited. Remember, O my God, Tobiah and Sanballat, in light of these actions of theirs. Also Noadiah the prophetess and the other prophets who were trying to scare me. So the wall was completed on the 25th day of Elul, in just 52 days. When all our enemies heard, and all the nations who were around us saw this, they were greatly disheartened. They knew that this work had been accomplished with the help of our God. In those days, the aristocrats of Judah repeatedly sent letters to Tobiah, and responses from Tobiah were repeatedly coming to them. For many in Judah had sworn allegiance to him, because he was the son-in-law of Shechaniah, son of Ara. His son Jonathan had married the daughter of Meshullam of Berechiah. They were telling me about his good deeds, and then taking back to him the things I said. Tobiah, on the other hand, sent letters in order to scare me. When the wall had been rebuilt, and I had positioned the doors and the gatekeepers, the singers and the Levites had been appointed, I then put in charge over Jerusalem my brother Hanani, and Hananiah, the chief of the citadel, for he was a faithful man and feared God more than many do. I said to them, "The gates of Jerusalem must not be opened in the early morning until those who are standing guard close the doors and lock them. Position residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their guard stations and some near their homes. Now the city was spread out and large, and there were not a lot of people in it. At that time, houses had not been rebuilt. My God placed it on my heart to gather the leaders, the officials, and the ordinary people, so they could be enrolled on the basis of genealogy. I found the genealogical records of those who had formerly returned. Here's what I found written in that record. These are the people of the province who returned from the captivity of the exiles, whom King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon had forced into exile. They returned to Jerusalem and to Judah, each to his own city. They came with Zerubbabel, Jeshua, Nehemiah, Azariah, Ramiah, Nahamani, Mordecai, Bilshan, Misbreth, Bigvai, Nahum, and Bana. The number of Israelite men was as follows. The descendants of Perish, 2,172. The descendants of Shephatiah, 372. The descendants of Ara, 652. The descendants of Pahath Moab from the line of Jeshua and Joab, 2,818. The descendants of Elam, 1,254. The descendants of Zatu, 845. The descendants of Zakkai, 760. The descendants of Benui, 648. The descendants of Bebai, 628. The descendants of Azgad, 2,322. The descendants of Adonikam, 667. The descendants of Bigvai, 2,067. The descendants of Adon, 655. The descendants of Ater, through Hezekiah, 98. The descendants of Hashem, 328. The descendants of Bezai, 324. The descendants of Hariph, 112. The descendants of Gibeon, 95. The men of Bethlehem and Netophah, 188. The men of Anatoth, 128. The men of the family of Asmaveth, 42. The men of Kiriath-Jearim, Kephirah, and Beeroth, 743. The men of Ramah and Geba, 621. The men of Michmash, 122. The men of Bethel and Ai, 123. The men of the other Nebo, 52. The descendants of the other Elam, 1,254. The descendants of Haram, 320. The descendants of Jericho, 345. The descendants of Lod, Hadid, and Ono, 721. The descendants of Sina, 3,930. The priests, the descendants of Jediah, through the family of Jeshua, 973. The descendants of Immer, 1,052. The descendants of Pashur, 1,247. The descendants of Haram, 1,017. The Levites, the descendants of Jeshua, through Kadmiel, through the line of Hodaviah, 74. The singers, the descendants of Asaph, 148. The gatekeepers, the descendants of Shalom, the descendants of Ater, the descendants of Talmon, the descendants of Akub, the descendants of Hatita, and the descendants of Shobai, 138. The temple servants, the descendants of Ziha, the descendants of Hasavah, the descendants of Taboath, the descendants of Keros, the descendants of Sia, the descendants of Paddan, the descendants of Lebna, the descendants of Hagabah, the descendants of Shalmai, the descendants of Hanan, the descendants of Gidel, the descendants of Gehar, the descendants of Reiah, the descendants of Rezin, the descendants of Nekodah, the descendants of Gazam, the descendants of Uzzah, the descendants of Paseah, the descendants of Besai, the descendants of Munam, the descendants of Nephsim, the descendants of Bakbuk, the descendants of Hakaphah, the descendants of Harhar, the descendants of Basluth, the descendants of Mehadah, the descendants of Harsha, the descendants of Barkos, the descendants of Sisera, the descendants of Tema, the descendants of Neziah, the descendants of Hatapha, the descendants of the servants of Solomon, the descendants of Sotai, the descendants of Sophereth, the descendants of Perida, the descendants of Jala, the descendants of Darkon, the descendants of Gidel, the descendants of Shephatiah, the descendants of Hatil, the descendants of Pochrath Hazebaim, something like that, and the descendants of Ammon, all the temple servants and the descendants of the servants of Solomon, 392. So you have Nehemiah and everyone else finishing up on the work of the wall. First off, Nehemiah contrasts himself with the former governors of the land. That is, the governors who preceded him had burned burdened the people excessively and had domineered over them by demanding excessive tribute. Nehemiah, on the other hand, not only does not demand this tribute, but also feeds at least 150 people, as well as foreigners, from his table each day. Then you have the enemies of this project and of Nehemiah and of God working against Nehemiah in particular. That is, by summoning him out into the field so that they might do him harm, not farm. They also summon him into the temple so that they can disgrace him and discredit him. But the work proceeds, and the wall was completed. And the enemies of God realized that it could only be done with the help of God. And then after that, you have a census of the first returned exiles being taken. So I imagine this particular census is more inclusive than the one in Ezra, because I imagine it has everyone who returned, not just the first wave. Guzik says only about 2% of the Jews who were carried away into exile by the Babylonians came back. We didn't read it, but near the end it says altogether the whole assembly was 42,360, besides their male and female servants. So a lot less than the 600,000 that initially went into the Promised Land. Interesting. Faithfulness is important here. In 7:2, I then put in charge over Jerusalem my brother Hanani, and Hananiah the chief of the citadel, for he was a faithful man, and feared God more than many do. This Hanani was the one who first told Nehemiah about the sad state of affairs in Jerusalem, and Nehemiah 1:2. His initiative and concern made him well qualified to govern. Guzik says, many folks who aren't all that gifted, they can't sing, they can't remember a bunch of Bible verses, they don't have a knack for teaching, and so forth, can still be used greatly of God if they are faithful and fear God. On the other hand, many terribly gifted people may always be frustrated in serving God if they are not faithful and fearing God. Also, it sucks too, because concerning these enemies of the work, because you had so many in Jerusalem who had sworn allegiance to them and were reporting how good they were and what good things they were doing, and then they're just trying to frighten Nehemiah with open letters of rebellion, which, if it was an open letter, it was free for all to see. So the idea was that though this rebellion didn't exist, that they would make rumors that it did exist, and that would be good enough. They reported Tobiah's good deeds before Nehemiah and reported my words to him. Undoubtedly, they saw Nehemiah as the bad guy. They figured Tobiah's deeds were good, and Nehemiah spoke some strong words against Tobiah. In Nehemiah 4:4, Nehemiah prays the evil Tobiah planned be turned back upon him, and that he be captured and carried away. Nehemiah had to be willing to be seen as the bad guy in order to do what is right by the people of God. He could see what the nobles of Judah could not. He knew that Tobiah's good deeds were not the whole story. All the while, Tobiah was sending frightening letters to Nehemiah. Those letters were not one of Tobiah's good deeds. Carrying on, 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 13. With regard to food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. If someone thinks he knows something, he does not yet know to the degree that he needs to know. But if someone loves God, he is known by God. With regard, then, to eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol in this world is nothing, and that there is no God but one. If, after all, there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father, from whom are all things, and for whom we live, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom are all things, and through whom we live. But this knowledge is not shared by all, and some, by being accustomed to idols in former times, eat this food as an idol sacrifice, and their conscience, because it is weak, is defiled. Now food will not bring us close to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. But be careful that this liberty of yours does not become a hindrance to the weak. For if someone weak sees you, who possess knowledge, dining in an idol's temple, will not his conscience be strengthened to eat food offered to idols? So by your knowledge the weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed. If you sin against your brothers or sisters in this way, and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. For this reason, if food causes my brother or sister to sin, I will never eat meat again, so that I may not cause one of them to sin. Yeah. So I think the idea here is that oftentimes you would have food that was sacrificed to idols in the marketplace, and the thinking of the weak of conscience was something like, this food was sacrificed to Hermes or whoever. I don't want to be a partaker in a ritual sacrifice to Hermes. But the strong in conscience, as it were, recognizes that Hermes doesn't exist, that it's merely an idol made of wood or stone or marble, as it were, and that there's only one God in heaven. That being said, Paul is advising those who make those realizations not to drag the weak conscienced brother into sin by saying, oh, well, I guess it's okay to participate in sacrifices to Hermes then. The meat offered on pagan altars was usually divided into 3 portions. One portion was burnt in honor of the god, one portion was given to the worshiper to take home and eat, and the third portion was given to the priest. If the priest didn't want to eat his portion, he sold it at the temple restaurant or meat market. The meat served and sold at the temple was generally cheaper. Then, as well as now, people loved a bargain. Paul asks the Corinthian Christians who know there is nothing to an idol to remember that not everyone knows this. And if someone believes there is something to an idol and they eat meat that has been sacrificed to an idol, their conscience being weak is defiled. Why is their conscience considered weak? Not because their conscience doesn't work. Indeed, it does work. In fact, it overworks. Their conscience is considered weak because it is wrongly informed. Their conscience is operating on the idea that there really is something to an idol. You can imagine the free Corinthian Christians with their superior knowledge saying, "But we're right." And in this case, being right is important, but it is not more important than showing love to the family of God. Paul makes the principle clear. Our actions can never be based only on what we know to be right for ourselves. We also need to consider what is right toward our brothers and sisters in Jesus. It is easy for a Christian to say, "I answer to God and God alone," and to ignore his brother or sister. It is true we will answer to God and God alone, but we will answer to God for how we treated our brother or sister. Lest I make my brother stumble. At the same time, the issue is making your brother stumble, and stumble over an issue that has direct relevance to the brother in question. Paul would never allow this principle to be a way for legalists to make demands and bind a Christian walking in liberty. In Galatians 2, Paul describes a situation where Peter made Gentiles think they had to come under Jewish customs and laws to be saved. Peter did this through his association and approval of some legalists. Paul rebuked Peter strongly because of this, even if the legalists from a Jewish background had said to the Gentiles, "Your lack of obedience to our customs stumbles us. We are stumbled brothers. You must do what we want." Paul would have replied, "You are not stumbled because you aren't being tempted to sin through their actions. Your legalism is being offended. Out of love, I will never act in a way that might tempt you to sin, but I don't care at all about offending your legalism. In fact, I'm happy to do it." Yeah, so certainly it's a situation where one needs to consider the facts in their entirety and act out of love. Carrying on, Psalm 33, verses 1 through 11. You godly ones, shout for joy because of the Lord. It is appropriate for the morally upright to offer him praise. Give thanks to the Lord with the harp. Sing to him to the accompaniment of a 10-stringed instrument. Sing to him a new song. Play skillfully as you shout out your praises to him. For the Lord's decrees are just, and everything he does is fair. The Lord promotes equity and justice. The Lord's faithfulness extends throughout the earth. By the Lord's decrees, the heavens were made. By a mere word from his mouth, all the stars in the sky were created. He piles up the waters of the sea. He puts the oceans in storehouses. Let the whole earth fear the Lord. Let all who live in the world stand in awe of him. For he spoke, and it came into existence. He issued the decree, and it stood firm. The Lord frustrates the decisions of the nations. He nullifies the plans of the peoples. The Lord's decisions stand forever. His plans abide throughout the ages. Interesting. The contrast there between God and the peoples. God merely says a word, and his decrees are in place forever. People, on the other hand, come together as a nation, and their plans are nullified. Carrying on, Proverbs 21, verses 8 through 10. The way of a guilty man is crooked, but as for the pure, his conduct is upright. It is better to live in a corner of a roof than in a house shared with a contentious woman. The soul of the wicked desires evil. His neighbor finds no favor in his eyes. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day.